Yeah, I thought I might just ask a couple of questions and some things that have come in on Twitter. So one key thing that comes up with this and with anything dealing with social media is how do you verify this stuff? Like how do you know who was actually there on the scene and they are actually accurately portraying what's going on, especially when you have, controversy over rubber bullets versus tear gas versus whatever other means are going on. And maybe Angela, since you were on the ground,
Since I'm doing a lot of the reporting myself, I tend to know what is accurate and what's not. And whether it's flashbang grenades or tear gas or rubber bullets versus real bullets, at that moment, like last night when there was a man hit in the knee with a rubber bullet and we were watching, we couldn't tell for sure. Rumors were flying, Twitter, tweets were going everywhere, everything was crazy. And we were just trying to be a little bit generic, but I was there, so I knew what had happened. I knew it was true. Now the other rumors, like that Occupy San Francisco's on the Bay Bridge, those things I've learned to send to the editors first and have them verify it. There's a lot of rumors. I think that's where editors are really great, and having Deb, for example, and other editors at the helm to help you is crucial.
That's a really good question. Me being the editor, kind of sitting on my butt while the reporters are out there doing all the work, I don't often know if the rumors are true. And one good example yesterday, when I was working on Storify, was that come across that the crowd was up to 10,000, and we were reporting 4,000. And so, unless my reporters could confirm that, I didn't put it in the Storify. So if it's something that is iffy, like when they were closing down the banks, I didn't put it in the Storify until it was confirmed by our reporters on the ground. So it's kind of working together that way. There's some things that are more innocuous that we put in. Another good example is when Obama, I just kind of had to have faith in this. When Obama was doing the LinkedIn thing, I did a Storify live. And I just had to trust that the people who said they were in there were in there. Some of them had photos to prove it, so that worked. But so in that case, I kind of had some faith.
One of the other really nice things about using tools like Storify, are you okay, Deborah?
So far, so good.
Okay, you look okay. Is that it actually frees me up as like a web producer, as a digital editor, to jump in on reporting when needed, because I'm not spending all of my time fixing code. So, I think one of the biggest stories from yesterday was what happened to the Whole Foods, and there were tweets flying that Whole Foods was threatening to fire any workers who went down to join the general strike. So I saw this on Twitter, and I wasn't seeing any verification for it. So I just called the local branch, and they were like, "We have no idea where this came from." I called the national media relations people. They said, "This is absolutely untrue. We talked to our general manager. Here's what happened." And in the meantime, people on Twitter were exhorting crowds to go to the Whole Foods and, demand reasons for why this was happening. And the next thing I see we got into a big Twitter campaign around trying to, say, listen, Mother Jones just fact checked this. Here's what we found. This isn't really happening. I was on Twitter countering people who were spreading this information. But 5 minutes later, we get, photos of the Whole Foods, glass broken and the whole building is defaced. So, But again, I actually chalked this up to the fact that I could jump in on reporting because I wasn't tied up with having to wrangle, annoying things with video embeds and image sizing, because Storify and other tools were helping that.
To sum up, you're all still reporters and editors. That doesn't change just because you're using Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Do your due diligence. I would much rather be right than first.
This is obvious, but we just tell our reporters to only tweet things that you yourself see, which has actually, I don't think we've gotten anything wrong just by telling them, don't tweet what people are telling you, don't spread anything that you don't actually see. And then we do have, editors and reporters in the room who are making phone calls and trying to like sort of synthesize everything else that every other news outlet is saying, so we can get a sense of what's going on. But it's really hard because it's super chaotic.
Questions? Yes, Mike.
I just wanted to jump in real quick.
Sure.
So, sorry, my name is Mike Stefanov. I'm with a company called Storyful, not to be confused with Storify. And the question of verification actually comes up a lot, and my company specializes in verification of news on social media. And while we're talking about how do you verify something that's going on social media, and all the fellow journalists are spot on, you can also use social media actually to verify what's going on. So it's not necessarily just what somebody who's in the protest themselves is saying, but with the Whole Foods controversy, for example, Whole Foods themselves were tweeting what their position, their standpoint on what was going on. So it's important to know that you can also use social media that these official agencies like police stations use, and they use their official YouTube accounts, for example, and Twitter and Facebook as well, and to be connected on that side of things, additionally, to put together the full picture of what's going on.
Well, I think you're making a really important point, which is in this day and age, everyone's a documentarian and everyone considers themselves media. I'm just amazed at the number of press releases that come through my email that have been sent by community members who are on press lists because they're considered to be media influencers. And we had a journalist who was reporting for us, Susie Cagle, who's a cartoonist who's doing an illustrated history of Occupy Oakland for Oakland Local, and she got arrested today. And I didn't know about it because I was working on a story, and I got a call from the Society of Professional Journalists saying, "Did you know Susie Cagle's been arrested? Have you spoken to her? You're her editor." And it was all over Twitter. And her partner had gotten on Twitter. She was being held in the jail. And here was a journalist who crossed that wall and was putting out all this information on Facebook to get people to call and verify her and help her get out. So, I think that we're in a situation today where you all may think, or some of us may think, we are the authorities, but we're actually more like the curators because everyone considers themselves to be documenting important events. And I think that's just really, really important to remember that there are a lot of voices that are recording for posterity.
So,
I started a news aggregation service called OccupyTheNews.com, serendipitously. But I am wondering if there are other resources like Fact Check, something that will help me determine whether what I'm posting on the site here is actual, factual news like you're talking about. It sounds like all you are just bound by some ethical rule that you're agreeing on and nothing else.
It's called common sense. No, seriously, it's experience and common sense. When someone tweets, okay, so during the protest, all of a sudden, there was a union labor speaker, and this was a big thing yesterday too. There was a union guy who was at Occupy Oakland who came up and said, "The port's closed!" And that went around everywhere, and there were people who tweeted that, right? So they were at Occupy Oakland. He was a union guy. He wasn't at the port. So it's just like, how does he know? Just because he's a union guy doesn't mean he knows. We called the port. It took 2 seconds. The port guy's like, "No, we're still open." So, and it was a union guy at the port who said they were still open. So we just tweeted that. I don't know. It's just experience and common sense. It's part of doing this job. I feel like you learn those things. If something in the pit of your stomach feels wrong, don't do it.
There's so much interest in various corners of the internet for finding a way to automate the process of fact checking. Is there some software-driven solution for this? And the problem is, a lot of facts just don't live in a way that they could be aggregated and automated that way. So, the port situation is a really good example, right? You guys made a call. I was really appalled by some of the outlets that were tweeting that, that the Port of Oakland has been shut down because a 30-second Google search turned up like a trade publication story from the night before saying that the port was actually shut down because workers were refusing to handle explosive containers. But there weren't like keywords, between like in that article that would have surfaced up like a fact check in the way that you're talking about. So I think I just really agree with what Ian is saying. There's just no substitute for experience in, when it comes to those questions.
I think also just kind of looking for objective sources versus, following only the Occupy feeds or the people who are on the ground and really passionate about it. And we get some really angry comments and we get some really excited comments, and my rule of thumb is if someone signs an email, yours in solidarity, I'm not going to think that that's, someone with kind of a measured, approach to what's going on. So, reputable news sources generally have their facts together. And then, of course, the rest is really good for color, but that's just that.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to apologize a little bit to the people on the live stream that they cannot hear things. So just to make sure all of the speakers do, and I'll repeat questions, but if you could speak into the mic very directly. I just wanted to ask too, the movement such that it is, is kind of this amorphous thing, right? They do have actually now a press committee in New York, I guess, that's doing things. Who is the source that you go to for the take of this crowd of people on what the position is, or where they're going to be, or what's happening? Susan.
In Oakland, we've had an incredible advantage because so many of the people who flock to the Occupy Wall Street movement have been long-term Oakland organizers and very engaged, and we know them from covering other things that have been happening in Oakland. And it's put us in a bit of a unique position because when the media backlash was happening against coverage of violence in Oakland, many Oakland local staffers were walking through the encampment and, where are you from? Oakland local. Oh yeah, okay. Because they know us as a local media source. They don't see us as corporate media or suburban media. They see us as grassroots media. But at the same time, it's been interesting that so many other people joined the movement who were not part of that core. And finding the right people to talk to has been challenging. And there is no one media source. But in the space of 2 weeks, Occupy Oakland now does have a media team. They produced a print paper that they handed out 4,500 copies of, Occupy Oakland Tribune. They have a Tumblr blog. They definitely went from people who said, we're not talking to anybody, we're going to ignore them, to saying, oh my goodness, we have to find a way to talk to people. So the savvy, has just dramatically increased in the 3 weeks or so of the movement.
I can definitely speak to this question because I came from a press conference, and it was one of the first press conferences I had experienced with the organizers of Occupy Oakland, who called a press conference, and there were 2 young women who started it. And it was a difficult process for them, I think. They were really learning on their feet. They did a good job. They weren't ready to be spokeswomen for the group, but nobody is. They can only speak as individuals, except when they're sanctioned to speak for the group, as these 2 women were. And the press conference turned out to be a little bit messy. And when the media backlash that you're talking about is primarily directed at TV news cameras, and on the night, was it last night? Yeah, it was last night. They stopped 3 TV news vans and blocked them. They had to turn around and go back a different way from the port. They are not friendly to TV cameras. And I thought it was going to come to blows for a minute, but it is very challenging. I think for print, I can sit down with people and talk to them and just understand what they're doing there. But cameras, it's a lot harder.
Questions? Isha?
Sure. Yes, I just sublet space from these guys, so I'm here. I'm not a journalist. I don't work at Storify despite the t-shirt. I'm just a regular consumer of news. And I guess I wanted to ask the question to the journalists out there. Like, it struck me, I think that from Mother Jones, you were talking about the feedback loop of your reporting with what was actually happening at Whole Foods. And I guess I just wanted to understand from you guys, now that you have these tools like Storify and other tools to like tighten that feedback loop from we report once a night to we report like in real time, like how do you see yourselves as actors in the cycle? And like, what do you want to achieve? Do you have objectives?
Okay, that's a good question. I'll repeat it. So, yeah, Misha was asking, how do people, go from this role where it's, there's many feedback loops, you're interacting with the readers, and everything now is in real time. It's not just once a day that you're publishing something or reporting something. Do you become an actor in the actual situation?
Yeah, it's really hard for us to know when a Storify is over. Like when do you stop updating? Because the whole promise of it is this is live, this is continually updated. We've experimented with finding ways to like almost recreate a print structure within a Storify, like using, like date lines and section breaks and stuff like that. But more than like that's the tech problem, but I think the real question you're asking is from a coverage standpoint, like when do we let the story go? Like now that we're online, and we've pulled incredibly late nights. I mean, it feels like I work at a daily newspaper. Because this is happening in our backyards and because we all really care about it, we don't know. Like, I guess the real answer to that question is we just don't know. We're just doing as much as we possibly can and just piling on as much as we possibly can right now. Because the audience clearly wants it. So we are very much figuring this out as like along with the consumers of the news right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a workflow issue. One thing I want to say, this idea that there's a 24-hour news cycle, a cycle implies there's a beginning and an end. There's no news cycle anymore. It's just, boom, time, I guess is what you want to call it. I know I'm done when my wife looks at me and says, honey, are you going to do this all night? That's when and I did it last night, and it was 7:45 last night. Because the reality is you're human. You do your best to work out the workflow, to have someone fill in, and you got to constantly tweak the workflow and be constantly willing to look at yourself and say, how can I do this better? But you can only do so much. And the people out there that are going to criticize you for not being up at 4 a.m, it's too bad. I mean, that's life.
I think actually Misha was asking something different, which is more the fact that you are reporting on something in real time and tweeting that the protesters are now like at the port. How much does that affect the fact that now maybe more people will rush to the port and try to be part of the story? I think that's what you were asking about, right, Misha? So, I mean, because it is real time, it's not that you're just, at the end of the day, somebody's reading it calmly the next day. You're actually reporting it in real time so that, are you actually fueling the protest in some way, potentially, right? I mean, that's the question, right?
I think that's definitely can be true to a certain extent if people hear that, everyone's, at the port, maybe more people will come. But I think one of the Whole Foods thing was a good example where when I was working on the Storify, people were tweeting like crazy, can anyone confirm that this is true? And so I left the Whole Foods element out of the Storify until people started spray painting Whole Foods, and then after that, that was done, and it was only around that time that Whole Foods, I think, tweeted. They didn't really tweet early on their denials. So that was one case where I was being very careful to not fuel something that might not have been true and become part of the story. But indeed, if we're tweeting the truth of what's happening, then there is the possibility that more people are going to join in. But we also have to be responsible for journalists too.
I worry about a different side of the same issue, which is that we don't have the resources, and I don't think it's actually appropriate to try to cover everything in every little second. And then I feel like what we choose to show or not show presents a point of view, and I think that's where a lot of mainstream media has been criticized for being very biased. So I was fooling around on the web this morning looking at the news, and I came across Michelle Malkin's page with a page that said all the bad things about Occupy Oakland that mainstream media won't show you. And it was about 14 pictures of violence and destruction. And I had seen every single one of these pictures already that morning. And I think we'd run one of them. We didn't run 40 of them. And I think that was a great paradigm for me of, what the challenges of covering something like this. If you can't cover everything, how do you present a view that on one hand shows what you think is important, on the other hand is a fair and accurate reflection of the variety and diversity of what's going on?
So, I work as a strategist, as we're talking about, but I'm speaking as a consumer, and I'm often frustrated by getting sort of facts without understanding. I understand that there's a confrontation between the police and this group of people, but what I want to know is, was this a measured response by the police to a very dangerous, violent situation? Was it the police themselves escalating to try to crush a movement? It's like, like what's really happening? And similarly, like with the day of strike, whose idea was it? Is it part of a more unified strategy? Does it make any sense in terms of long-term goals of the movement? So, what my question is does the flow of events pass everybody in the form of Twitter streams and media streams and blah, blah, blah? Does the flow of events, does the increase in the flow of events make it harder to find the time to figure out what's really going on and tell the story, or does it make it easier because there's just so much more information?
Yeah, so just to repeat the last point, does the flow of events make it difficult to tell what's going on because there's so much out there, or does it make it easier because there's so much available? And also earlier you were asking a lot, I think, essentially about context. How do you know what you're seeing is actually an appropriate response to what's happening on the ground, and how do you try to portray that to your audience?
Just speaking to what we've done, we kind of just use our various tools to kind of present different types of reporting. So we use Twitter to just give tidbits from the scene. And yes, the flow of information makes it much more difficult to synthesize on the spot, especially when you're working with a team of 2 or 3. So we kind of make it very clear before we send someone out into the field. I'll tweet, at Robin Wilkie, who's my associate editor, is heading down into the fray. She'll be tweeting live updates more on our latest, story. And then I'll tweet a link to the story, which has, the analysis from the day and all the background information, and then the live blog code is kind of embedded at the bottom. So it's really a something for everyone type story. So if you want to kind of, feel like you're there and feel like you're part of the action, you can read the live blog and just kind of see what's happening on a minute-by-minute basis. But if you'd rather kind of get every touch point and read kind of more of an analysis, you can read the actual story at the top and watch the videos. So I think the answer to your question is yes, it makes it more difficult, but if you package it in a certain way so that you're kind of giving certain readers what they want and presenting it easily for them. So if you're the one who wants to read, the background, the full story will be there. Obviously it's not up to the minute updated, but it's, the most recent version. Whereas if you're some protester in the field, if you just want to know what this crazy man with the rubber bullet, bruise had to say with his picture, you can find that on Twitter as well.
I think that's a great question, and I think the answer is both. It makes it more difficult, but it also makes it easier. I was a journalist before Google existed and before social media existed, and believe me, it was a lot harder to get information in those days. But also, I think it's also the responsibility of the news organization to kind of step back the next day after the heat of the moment and to try to put it in perspective. It's not just the heat of the moment we're covering. It's also like stepping back and saying, okay, were the police too extreme in, removing the people from Tent City or not? And that's also part of our job. And it's difficult. It's really hard to do all these things, especially with downsizing the way it's been.
I'd like to comment because I think that with the way that I work is with my phone. I can talk to my editor. I talk a lot on the phone to the editors during the process, and they can tell me well, did you ask this? And what about that? Oh yeah, right, okay, so I'll ask that. Or maybe somebody is asking that of me on Twitter, and it's like, hey, Angela, what about this? Or did you do this? Did you think about that? So I think it's it's a lot of work. It's a lot more work, but I think it works well. And if you have, like you're saying, if you have an editor who's a good editor and who's thinking as well with you, I don't see a problem. But we are fallible, so I'm not saying it's perfect.
I wanted to ask what you see the effects of citizen journalism, specifically live streaming, because this week we've been analyzing that. I've been out there, and we've seen now people like Financial Times, and BBC, and the New York Times using live streams and other data, and even in the live streams discussion check. Have you found that impacting you guys in your story making to make it easier? Because it's helping us kind of get a picture of what the data is trending.
So yeah, the question was about live streams, the fact that a lot of major sites have embedded live streams, and people are talking about what's happening, how has that affected?
And citizen journalism streams in there more studying, more focused.
Yes, it's citizen journalism streams too. Yeah.
Nobody go ahead.
I'd say, it's another source for us having the stream of Occupy Oakland and on the 25th in particular that morning was very helpful, but we consider them tips again. So when we see tear gas going off, it's something where, okay, we're going to do what we can to check it as best we can. At the same time, I think in general, the streams we've seen for Occupy Oakland are still pretty rare in citizen journalism. We tend to forget that the Bay Area in a lot of ways is not like the rest of the country, or even the rest of California. I ran a citizen journalism project in the Central Valley, and we thought we'd get photos of news events, and we got photos of puppies and babies, because that's what people, and club meetings. So it's great to have them, but I don't think that it's been a huge thing across the country just yet, just perspective.
Actually, speaking to that, if you do use a live stream for your reporting, be really careful. Bay City News covered when SFPD may have been ready to raid Occupy SF, and I read the story. They said actually, supervisors spoke over live stream, and they attributed David Campos' remarks to Eric Marr. And since I was there, I realized that, and I emailed Eve at SF Appeals, and she's a client, and said, as long with the Bay Guardian's clip of the video showing what Eric Marr said complete, and he didn't say that, and then later wrote a clip of Campos. You got this wrong.
Yeah, they did that with the Health Insurance to get like 35,000 views.
Yeah, there have been some pretty incredible live streams. Like last night, when the police did move in, there was this guy named Sean who uses it for sure, and we sort of have this rambling running commentary. And I think it was ABC, one of the ABC people said, use of tear gas is unconfirmed. And it's like, well, the live stream definitely showed tear gas being used, and you could hear Sean, talking and gagging and reporting the effects of tear gas. So that was pretty clear.
Okay. We live back there. Yeah, please go ahead.
My question is, with all of you guys, monitoring Twitter and Facebook, and what the people on the street are kind of uploading via social media, and kind of using that to incorporate into your live streams and into the coverage that you're doing. How are you staying unique? If all of you guys are kind of looking out there and pulling the same most interesting content, finding the best pictures, finding the most interesting tweets, finding the most compelling, kind of citizen analyses of what's going out there, I'm wondering how you use that to kind of create your own voice and your own brand of journalism. And I know Susan is kind of in a different category because you rely primarily on citizen journalists and kind of present these different views. But I'm asking this question more to the other people on the panel. I know that you do a really great job, Susan, of what you're doing with putting the voice out there.
We actually have a daily news feed and a news budget focused on Occupied Oakland right now.
Yeah, so just to repeat the question, it's if everybody's monitoring all these similar channels and curating, aggregating, resynthesizing everything, like how do you maintain a unique perspective for your audience? Because you all do have different audiences who come to your sites do you, how does that factor into things?
Are we all going?
Well,
Yeah, I think keeping your audience in mind is really important, and sort of keeping in mind why they go to you. We're not assuming that we're the only thing people are reading, because that would be ridiculous. So, I mean, for us, we're an all-weekly. We try to be funny. Works out 60% of the time. It's kind of weird because this is a pretty grave event most of the time, but we try to retweet other people being funny and sort of break it up in that way. But I think that just having some sense of why people read your newspaper or your website, the other 365 days of the year, or 4 if it's not a leap year, is really, really important, and sort of having a sense of why people reach you most of the time when there's not crazy breaking news.
I think for us, it's definitely just a question of which of our resources are the strongest, and which, what we want to use our energy to put, our best work into. So with that, we've got a really strong live blogging tool. So we've been really trying to maintain kind of a global voice on all of the Occupy protests, not just throughout the country, but worldwide, maximizing our resources at all the various Huffington Post bureaus, throughout the country. And another thing that I found kind of helpful is just kind of feeding off the other local media outlets. Again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that I find really unique and awesome about being a journalist in the Bay Area is the kind of sense of camaraderie that I feel like, the media outlets feel. It's not, I don't feel a sense of competition so much as a sense of we really can kind of feed off of each other and bring the best of what we have to offer to light. So again, if East Bay Express, I've been retweeting you guys all the time because you are hilarious, and being kind of tongue-in-cheek funny isn't really our jam. So I go to you guys for that, or like, Mother Jones for that first Whole Foods tweet yesterday. We retweeted that from you guys. So kind of picking and choosing the best of what your peers have to offer, and then kind of really putting your own energy into the resources that you're great at, which is, for us, it's the live blog, or making sure that great, Keith Olbermann bit calling on Mayor Kwan to resign gets on our big news page right away, so that people have kind of a mosaic of things to look at. If that makes sense.
From these, from protesters themselves, and producing your own media, how that's changing the narrative and the way that the narrative is handled. I mean, think about this compared to, say, WTO in Seattle.
Yeah, great question. So how is self-reporting from the protesters themselves changing the narrative, which is obviously a pretty recent phenomenon?
Oakland Local really was very much launched with the murder of Oscar Grant and the need to have a more balanced and diverse voice around that topic. And it's been really interesting for me to compare the local and the national attention and effort for Occupy Oakland to that, because those were both two situations where we've gotten a lot of broader audience than just Oakland. And one of the things that we're seeing now is a much more deliberate awareness of sources like Oakland Local being a resource to amplify voices. So there's a young blogger who's a grad student at Berkeley who I found probably 6 months ago, whose blog I read, and this guy has been writing the most wonderful, thoughtful, literate posts about Occupy Oakland as a participant in the movement. And we're running one of his posts on the front page today about being at the port, not being part of a decision to occupy a building. And this is writing that none of our reporters could ever do, that just provides such a rich and valuable insight. But, he was not surprised when I said to him, could we rerun this? Could we rerun the 5 or 6 other pieces he's written? We haven't run everything. He was like, oh yeah, that would be good, sure. So I think that people are much more knowledgeable now at the idea that they are documentarians and that media may want to amplify or reflect or sample or quote them. And, a lot of the people that we're working with, we're getting this phenomenal, we're getting like 15 emails a day of people saying, hey, you can use my photos. You have permission to use my photos. hey, here's a link to this piece I've written. Here's my blog. I mean, we're just getting a huge outpouring. I think it's that sensibility of the Arab Spring that people want to testify and make sure their own voice is heard.
Well, it's a really interesting question. Thinking about it, Iran is still, the government is still in Iran. Wars are still fought, genocides and so forth, and no amount of reporting has really seemed to change that. It takes something to happen. There has to be some element that changes things, and it's not going to just be the reporting, whoever's doing it, or the information coming out, except I think this is one of the few instances this time when something was changed by the social media, and in the sense that the use of it among the people involved in the movement really spurred them on. Like Oak for Sure, he ran out of batteries, and the call went for batteries went all across. It went to New York, I know, may have gone much farther than that, and he got his batteries really fast, and it was in the middle of the night, and we were all exhausted, tear gassed, everything else, and he got his batteries. So this is one of the few times I feel like there was some kind of change as a result, and that movement really grew through the people within the movement, that solidarity that was facilitated by a tool that happens to be social media. So that's
I'm going to throw this back on you a little bit. I'm not denying that Twitter and that social media can make a big difference, but I think it's important to have a little perspective. One of the questions I asked before Wednesday was what constitutes a general strike? At what point, how many people have to be on strike before we can call it a general strike, in fairness, and put that tag on it? And I've been hashtagging things, Occupy Oakland's general strike, because they called the general strike and they were behind it. I'm very cautious about implying that the entire city or everybody in Oakland was on strike. I think social media, to go back to a point that was brought up earlier, social media has created this torrent of information coming at us. It's very important for us every once in a while to step out and think that, well, there's a lot of people on Twitter, there's also a heck of a lot of people who are not on Twitter. And as a journalist for a media organization like KQED, I have to be sure to represent their opinions as well. And there's still a lot of people that don't use these tools. So,
Bert, that begs the question, and this goes back to something that was said earlier about how many people are paying attention to. We're giving the people what they want. I think that came from Tasneem, that there's a demand for this information. Well, as Ian just said, not everybody's using social media. I'd like to know how you all know, as journalists, that your readers want the coverage and the emphasis that you're giving to things like Occupy Oakland, or any subject for that matter. How do you know? Are you getting traffic data?
So the question is, how do journalists know that they're giving the readers the stories they want and the way they want to receive them? Yeah.
So, one thing I would say, first of all, is that social media is a big source, but it's not our only sources. But when it comes to something like Occupy Oakland, it's the biggest story in our backyard right now, and the Oakland Tribune is the newspaper of Oakland, and it is a national movement, international movement becoming. It's kind of, Occupy Oakland is kind of a no-brainer when you're talking about them coming into a city and closing it down.
I'm not asking that question. How do you know what your readers want? How do you know that? I understand that that it is an important story. I get that. But
readers tell us what they want.
Got it. How are they doing that now?
Well, now social media, they do it through social media a lot more, obviously, through Facebook, through Twitter. We still do get letters, believe it or not, and we do get emails. and phone calls. We just changed our comics, and believe me, we got a lot of phone calls. So we do hear from readers. The readers that I worry about are the readers we don't hear from. But, and also, we do measure it by the web traffic that we've had has just increased tremendously when it comes to Occupy Oakland. So that's another way to measure it.
Sure, thank you.
So Oakland Local is so small that we have to be metrics junkies because we have to watch what we're doing really carefully. So there are actually 3 of us who are obsessed with looking at analytics every morning. And what I look at is not overall traffic, because I don't really care if I get a big pop on Yahoo News or Google News. I want to look at what the sources are, where my traffic is coming from, and what the levels of engagement are. I want to see that people coming from Facebook or Twitter or SFGate, what kind of quality of attention are they paying? And for us, Twitter and Facebook are in our first 6 referrers, so I look a lot at what stories people are looking at, but I also look at the impressions that I get on Facebook, and I look at tweet reach to look at influence. So comments are number 1, when people start going viral in comments. But I knew Occupy Oakland was going to be a major story for us when we put up a story the day after the police brutality, and that story went viral. And we were not the first people to publish. The Trib and the Chronicle published before us. People were waiting for our story because there was a cadre of people who trusted us. So, I think that you have to look at a lot of different sources, but we are totally data junkies to help check what our impressions are.
We are too.
Lots of metrics on it.
Well, our metrics are pretty insane, and we have really comprehensive access to what stories people are clicking on and how often, and what their referrals are, and definitely I agree with both Open Local and the Trib as to using social media and comments. But I think it's also important to remember that it's not always necessarily about what the readers want, and part of our responsibility as journalists is to report the most important stories of the day based on, us as professional journalists kind of using our judgment to decide. We kind of call it eat your veggies news sometimes. If, everyone wants to click on a crazy crime story about the school administrator who was caught downloading child porn, for example. I have that story on my page right now, and it's clicking off the charts. But just as important is a lesser known piece about, how the latest pension battle is going to play out in City Hall, because, it's not the most attractive story, but it's relevant to the people of San Francisco. So
I'd rather hear you say that than say that people want, I'd really rather hear journalists say, I'm making that decision, then tell me that this is what people want, and I'm going, is that what they really want? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Again, to kind of go for the perspective angle, it's what some people want. When I talk about more, it really is more. We're not going to stop providing Morning Edition and All Things Considered, which people obviously love, and we're not going to stop doing 18 newscasts a day. We're the number 1 rated radio station in San Francisco right now. It's more. It's something different, and we're constantly measuring our metrics to make sure we're hitting that audience and what that means. I think we're all still trying to figure that out. ROI, obviously, but it's more. There's other stuff you can go to that we offer too.
Thanks.
Just one last question. Yeah, right here.
My name's Brittany. I'm here with a couple other people from OaklandNorth.net, and I'm just curious. We were having some of these conversations with our editors this morning about kind of, as a journalist, where you go from here and what the coverage is going to look like. Because we were talking about we're all human, and we've all been kind of going full speed for about 2 weeks now, and what kind of conversations you guys are having in your newsrooms about, are you going to be waiting down there for breaking news, or kind of just like hovering around, watching Twitter and waiting to see what happens, and kind of how this story is going to develop from here, if we even really know.
Yeah, great question to wrap up on. So yeah, where do things go from here? What are you looking at? What are you monitoring? How do you plan to cover what's happening? Tasmin?
Yeah, we just can't keep going the way we've been going. So I think it gets to a place of analysis and context now. Like that, I think is the most value we can provide. Taking that step back, doing the 30,000 feet view is just what we can accomplish now based on like the bandwidth of people with kids and people needing just to sleep and eat on a normal schedule and not being able to do this anymore. But I think the truth is also that's just where this story is right now. So I think trying to continue doing the minute-to-minute stuff was valuable when people were trying to understand like why people are in the streets and what it is they're trying to do. And I think that I just really believe that there is a general understanding of this now. And the question really is, how does this fit into what happened in Egypt and what's happening in New York compared to what's happening in Oakland? Like, is Oakland going to remain a focal point of this movement? So it's, I think, just some of those bigger questions now.
It's also, how long can they go on? It goes both ways.
Yeah, I would agree that it's probably at a point of analysis and context, but also, looking at how the city responded and how the city's going to continue to respond is definitely our local story. And I was going to say one more thing, and I forgot because this was a long night last night. And how long they can go on, and what does this movement mean, and is it something that really has legs that is going to change things down the road? And if they're out there again, doing a general strike, we'll be there.
Actually, we'll be there tonight. As long as they're going to be there, and tomorrow night, and so forth. We'll be there. Not as many people, but we've been there from the beginning, and we'll be there probably until the end because we are the Oakland Tribune. And it kind of depends also because on Saturday they're talking about the next general strike. Tonight there's a 7 o'clock meeting. There's also a city council meeting. There's the recall. Sometimes it just is driven by the news and the analysis. I think we've been doing a fair amount of analysis all the way around. I haven't always had time to read it, but I think that that's the case. So you can never tell, really, right? But we'll be there tonight with gas masks.
So yeah, thank you again, everybody, for coming here. Thank you to our panelists. So we could thanks for coming, and we'll be sticking around. If people still want to chat, please feel free to talk. And hope to see you again soon.